Somewhere in the mountains south of Seoul, South Korea, there is a stone structure you can see on Google Earth. It's 270 feet across. It's in a military zone, and a growing number of people, including a sitting United States congressman, say something is hidden underneath it. Something that was too big to move. So they built around it instead. I'm Carol Ann. Welcome to the In-Between. Let's start at the beginning. July 2023. A man named Ross Coulthart sits down on the Project Unity podcast with host Jay Anderson. Now, Coulthart isn't some random guy on the internet. He's an award-winning Australian investigative journalist. He wrote a book called In Plain Sight, and he's the reporter who broke the David Grush whistleblower story that led to actual congressional hearings on UFOs. The guy has credentials. So when Coulthart leans into the microphone and says this on Project Unity with Jay Anderson, people pay attention.
What if some of that is so big it can't be moved? So big they built a building over it in a country outside of the United States of America. I know that sounds preposterous, and I know, oh my God, you can just hear them now, the bleating debunkers. Let's see this investigated.
Then he drops the real bomb.
I know exactly where it is.
He goes on another podcast, That UFO Podcast, and adds some details. He says he can't name the country. He says the facility where this thing is hidden serves a dual purpose, and that revealing its location would put people's lives in danger. Now, it's really important to note that he hasn't budged, not in 2.5 years. In August 2025, a former BBC journalist using the handle Moneypenny publicly challenged him on X, giving him 3 hours to respond, or she'd reveal the location herself. Coulthart's response?
And I've actually had death threats from lunatics on the web who are saying to me I'm under an obligation to reveal it. But what I know is if I revealed the location of that object, I would put the lives of good men and women in the service of their country in jeopardy.
So Coulthart says it exists. He says he knows where it is, but he says he's not telling. Now, if this story stopped right there, most people would file it under interesting but unverifiable and move on. But it doesn't stop there. Because about a week before Coulthart drops his bombshell, a man named Dr. Steven Greer steps up to a microphone at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. on June 12, 2023. Greer is a retired emergency medicine physician and the founder of the Disclosure Project. Greer's been pushing for UFO disclosure for decades, and he doesn't play Coulthart's game of mystery. He names names. He says a source told him about an alien craft in the mountains outside Seoul, South Korea. He says it was so huge they had to build a structure around it. He claims South Korean forces brought the craft down using some type of electronic warfare system, and that the soldiers involved were very frightened by what they found. He says they had to carve out a huge part of the mountain just to contain it, because it was too massive to move anywhere. And the incident he's pointing to? October 1976. The South Korean military opened fire on unidentified lights flying over the capital city. We'll get to that in a minute. Greer also says we have the same kind of hiding in plain sight structure right here in the U.S. at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, but nobody knows where that site is. He says he can speak freely about all of this because, as a private citizen, he's not bound by any classification restrictions. Now, I need to pause here and talk about Greer's credibility because it matters. A lot of people in the UFO community consider Greer to be a controversial figure. That's putting it gently. The Hollywood Reporter once described his documentary as far too impassioned in its nuttiness to be a purely cynical Scientology-style sham. A Substack called Political Saucer published a whole piece titled The Steven Greer Problem, arguing that his approach creates what scientists call noise in the field. Every debunked claim, every sensationalized documentary, every unverified assertion adds to a cacophony that drowns out legitimate signals. So we've got one guy who says he knows where it is, but won't tell us. And another guy who tells us exactly where it is, but has a credibility problem. Not exactly a slam dunk. But then the game changes because the story jumps from podcasters and researchers straight into the halls of Congress. But before we make that jump, I want to fill you in a little bit about something going on here in the InBetween studio. I need a new chair. Here is my current chair. You could call it suboptimal. So, having FlexiSpot send us their C7 Max chair is like magical timing, and it was a breeze to assemble. The headrest has 3D positioning to find that perfect spot. The chair height and backrest height and seat depth are all adjustable, and the armrests are crazy. FlexiSpot calls them 5D because they adjust in so many ways. The lumbar support feels amazing, and it even has a built-in leg rest for you when you want to really kick back and relax. The only thing I'm not sure about is the armrests. They move it all over, but as far as I know, they don't lock tight in any way. So if you're like me and you shift around a lot and you like to lean on the armrest to help you do that, the armrests can push right out. But the rest of it is a great chair. However, I think Mr. InBetween is going to steal the chair. His chair is in even worse shape than my chair. And he sat in this chair and he is in love with it. If you're interested, you can go to FlexiSpot.com, go to the C7 Max chair. That's this one right here. Put in our promo code C750 to get $50 off. If you want a new chair but have a smaller budget, you can go for the C5 chair. Or they have a new chair called the C7 Morpher that's even better than this one. They have a 30-day risk-free trial period and a full 10-year warranty. So go to FlexiSpot.com, link in the description, and use promo code C750 for $50 off. And thank you to FlexiSpot for sponsoring this video. Now, back to the halls of Congress. In early 2026, Missouri Congressman Eric Burleson, a Republican who sits on the House Oversight Committee, goes on Newsmax with host Rob Finnerty and says this.
I'm not going to mention the country because I've heard of it inside of a closed setting, and I want to protect my classification level.
He's talking about the same object, an object so large it cannot be moved, with a structure built around it. He directly references Greer as having previously mentioned the site, and he expresses his frustration.
I'm having a difficult time getting access to even those facilities that are just within a few miles from my office in Washington, D.C. So to try to attempt to go to another country and get permission at that level is going to be somewhat insurmountable.
Now, this is a sitting United States congressman. And this isn't some fringe politician chasing headlines. Burleson has been building toward this moment for years. Let me walk you through his track record. In March 2025, Burleson hired David Grush as a special advisor. If that name doesn't ring a bell, Grush is the former Air Force intelligence officer who testified before Congress in July 2023 that the U.S. government was running illegal programs to retrieve and reverse engineer craft of non-human origin. His whistleblower complaint to the Intelligence Community Inspector General was found credible and urgent. Burleson brought him onto his staff, got his security clearance reinstated, and the House Ethics Committee signed off on the whole arrangement. In August 2025, Burleson introduced the UAP Disclosure Act as an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act. And then, in September 2025, Burleson did something nobody expected. During a House oversight hearing on UAP transparency, he played a video taken on October 30th, 2024 by an MQ-9 Reaper drone off the coast of Yemen. In the footage, a second Reaper drone fires a Hellfire missile at an unidentified object. The missile strikes the object, and the object keeps going. George Knapp, the investigative journalist who testified at that hearing, said,
"That's a Hellfire missile smacking into that UFO and just bounced right off." And they kept going.
ABC News, NBC News, CBS News, Fox News, and the War Zone all covered that footage. The Pentagon response? No comment. So now we've moved from podcasters talking about a mystery building to a sitting congressman with White House backing showing classified military footage in Congress with a decorated whistleblower on his staff, actively trying to get to the very site that Greer named 3 years earlier. And then February 2026, a name from a completely different era enters the conversation. Uri Geller. Yes, that Uri Geller. The famous, or depending on your perspective, infamous psychic and illusionist who was publicly debunked by James Randi back in 1973. However, declassified CIA documents confirm that Geller was genuinely tested under Project Stargate, the government's remote viewing program. In 1973, the CIA actually concluded that he demonstrated paranormal abilities, though the entire program was eventually scrapped in 1995. Geller posted on X.
Look, I've been told many times not to talk about something to do with Korea. I don't care anymore.
He claims the U.S. Army flew him to South Korea undercover, allegedly to look for North Korean tunnels. But he said that wasn't the main reason. He claims a huge UFO was at the site and that large stone surrounding it absorbed the cosmic forces. Now, look, I know what some of you are thinking. Uri Geller? Really? And I hear you. But the point isn't whether you believe Geller's psychic powers are real. The point is that we now have a journalist, a physician, a congressman, a former intelligence officer, and a man with documented CIA connections all pointing at the same country. Now, let's talk about what they're actually pointing at. Internet sleuths zeroed in on a specific location almost immediately after these claims went public. The Anyang Vortak Station. It sits on top of a mountain near Anyang, South Korea, about 10 miles south of central Seoul. The coordinates are 37 degrees, 24 minutes, 49 seconds north, and 126 degrees, 55 minutes, and 42 seconds east. You can pull it up on Google Earth right now. What you'll see is a roughly 270-foot diameter circular structure sitting on a mountain peak. The structure underneath is a 30-foot tall circular building constructed using random rubble masonry. Researchers estimate approximately 8,000 to 9,000 stones were used in its construction. The site is off limits to civilian traffic, sitting in a military-controlled zone. And sitting right in the center of this massive stone circle is a Vortak antenna. That stands for VHF, Omnidirectional Range and Tactical Air Navigation. It's a radio beacon used for aircraft navigation. Now, before the debunkers weigh in, you need to understand the event that believers say put something under that mountain. October 14th, 1976. Dusk is falling over Seoul. Citizens look up and see somewhere between 10 and 12 bright lights flying in a wing formation toward the Blue House, which is the presidential residence. Strictly a no-fly zone. And what happens next is both amazing and terrifying. Anti-aircraft gun positions around Seoul opened fire in the capital city. Thousands of rounds were fired into the sky over one of the most densely populated cities in Asia. 1 person was killed and 31 others were injured from stray bullets. The next day, the government tells the press that a Northwest Airlines cargo plane bound for Osaka accidentally wandered into restricted airspace and was fired upon. Case closed. Except the plane landed in Tokyo, not Osaka. And it landed unharmed, not a scratch on it. No evidence any bullets ever came near it. And there were thousands of witnesses who saw the lights, who saw the anti-aircraft fire, and whose descriptions of what they saw don't match a cargo plane at all. A Korean investigative show called I Want to Know It aired a special on the incident in November of 2020. Despite the fact that this was a military operation in the middle of the capital city with civilian casualties, there are virtually no surviving government records. Eyewitness testimony and government announcements don't match. Even the number of victims isn't consistent across reports. That's the incident. That's what believers say is connected to the structure on that mountain. Something was brought down that night, they claim, and the Anyang site is where it ended up. Now, let's talk about the people who say it's all nonsense, because the debunkers on this one, they're pretty good. Tyler Rogoway is the founder and editor-in-chief of The War Zone, one of the most respected defense journalism outlets in the country. When the Seoul UFO claims started circulating in July of 2023, Rogoway didn't waste any time. He went on X and laid out a 3-point technical analysis that basically said, slow your roll. Point 1. The location makes perfect sense for a navigation beacon. It's on a mountain peak that provides a clear line of sight in all directions, which is exactly what you need for an omnidirectional radio emitter in terrain as mountainous as South Korea. Point 2. The antenna in the center is a common VORTAC array, critical for both civilian and military aviation operations. You can't put one of these things in a valley because the mountains would block the signal. You have to put it up high. Point 3. The large flat top of the structure. Rogoway says he looked at the satellite imagery and immediately thought, I bet you could drive vehicles up there. And sure enough, you can. He argues that during a crisis, this would be an ideal location for anti-aircraft systems, providing a wide area for sensors and missile batteries. And being right next to Seoul, that makes sense for a country that is technically still at war with its neighbor to the north. His conclusion? So, does a buried UFO come with all this? I will leave that answer up to you, but clearly, this facility has other, far more pedestrian purposes. And then there's the South Korean side of the debunk, which might be even more damaging to the UFO claim. NamaWiki, which is basically South Korea's Wikipedia, did a deep dive into the aviation records and found something pretty definitive. Communication transcripts from the 1976 Seoul UFO incident show that Flight NW902 flew 1 mile north of the Anyang Aviation Radio Beacon Station, which means the VORTAC was already built, already functioning as a radio beacon on the very night of the incident. If a UFO had crashed and this building was constructed around it afterward, the VORTAC would have had to be destroyed first, but the records show that it was operating normally. Their conclusion? It was initially impossible to build and expand Anyang VORTAC after the UFO fell. So, the debunkers have their evidence. The aviation records are real, the VORTAC's function checks out, but we still have a real historical event in a real city near a real facility and a growing list of people saying there's something hidden there. Now, I need to take you somewhere you might not expect, because there's a third possibility that we haven't explored yet. And in some ways, it's the most unsettling one. And to get there, we need to go back to New Mexico in the 1980s, because what happened there should make every single person watching this, believer or skeptic, deeply uncomfortable. A man named Paul Benowitz lived near Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque. We have an episode where we dive deeper into Paul's story, and I will leave a link for that episode in the description. But for this episode, we'll just cover the highlights. Paul was a successful businessman, an electrical engineer, a physicist. He ran a company that had contracts with the Air Force. This was not some unhinged guy in a tinfoil hat. This was a smart, accomplished man who started picking up strange radio signals and filming unexplained lights over a part of the base that stored nuclear weapons. He reported what he was seeing to the Air Force. That's when things went sideways. Rather than telling Benowitz to stop or explaining that what he was observing was classified but terrestrial, the Air Force Office of Special Investigations assigned a counterintelligence agent named Richard Doty to handle him. And by handle, I mean systematically destroy his grip on reality. Doty, acting under orders from AFOSI with involvement from the NSA, CIA, and DIA, fed Benowitz fabricated documents confirming his worst fears: underground alien bases, secret government treaties with extraterrestrials, an impending invasion. They planted fake air vents around Dulce Mountain to make it look like something was hidden underground. They even projected shapes that looked like flying saucers into clouds in the area, all to keep Benowitz looking in the wrong direction, away from the actual classified programs he had stumbled onto. And it worked. Benowitz spiraled. He became increasingly paranoid. He claimed aliens were coming through the walls of his house at night. He started keeping guns and knives in every room. He was eventually hospitalized, and he never fully recovered. Paul Benowitz died in 2003, still believing a narrative that had been deliberately, knowingly, and methodically pushed on him by people who knew every word of it was false. Doty has admitted to all of it, publicly, on camera. He says he was following orders. The Air Force has never officially responded. Now, here's the part that should really bother you. After Doty came clean, after he admitted that he had fabricated documents, fed lies to researchers, and driven a man to a mental breakdown, the UFO community didn't shun him. They didn't treat him as a cautionary tale about the dangers of trusting government-adjacent sources. They invited him in. He spoke at UFO MegaCon in 2019. He sat for interviews with George Knapp. He consulted on the X-Files. The very community he had poisoned welcomed him as a source. And I'm not bringing this up to say that UFOs aren't real or that everyone researching them is being fooled. I'm bringing it up because the Benowitz case proves something important. The idea of a government using UFO mythology as a tool isn't some paranoid fantasy. It's documented history. It happened. They admitted it. And the people most passionate about the subject, the ones who would tell you they could never be manipulated, turned out to be the easiest to manipulate. Not because they were stupid, but because they wanted to believe so badly that even the man who had poisoned the well was welcome back to draw water. That's worth keeping in the back of your mind as we look at what's happening right now. Because a former Navy behavioral scientist thinks he sees the same playbook being run again, just at a much, much larger scale. In November 2025, a man named Chase Hughes sat down with Sean Ryan on The Sean Ryan Show, episode 253. If you haven't heard of Chase Hughes, he's a former U.S. Navy chief, a behavioral scientist, and an expert in psychological operations. He wrote a book called The Ellipsis Manual and another called The Behavior Operations Manual. He's a member of the Behavioral Panel on YouTube. This guy studies manipulation for a living. Sean Ryan asked him a direct question. Is that a psyop? Do you think that's a psyop? And Hughes didn't blink.
That we're managing the way that our perception of the UFO UAP thing is being managed is absolutely a psyop.
Let that sink in for a second. He's not saying UFOs aren't real. He's saying the management of the information is the operation. He went on.
I've seen so many people come out and say, like, I'm allowed to say this and I'm not allowed to say that. And that's not what a whistleblower does.
Think about that. Coulthard says he knows where it is, but he can't tell you. Burleson says he heard about it in a classified setting and needs to protect his classification level. Greer says he can talk because he's not bound by the same rules. Each person reveals just a little more than the last. The drip never stops, but the faucet never fully opens either. Hughes laid out what he calls the FATE model of how psychological operations work. Focus, authority, tribe, emotion. Focus. Social media captures your attention by showing you what to look at. Like a couple of UFO posts and suddenly your entire feed is flying saucers. Authority. Blue check marks, government officials, retired military officers lending credibility. Tribe. UFO communities, subreddits, Facebook groups. They create an us versus them identity. The believers versus the debunkers. pick your side. And emotion. This is the big one. The anticipation cycle. So-and-so is going live tonight at 7. He's going to expose everything. New secrets you've never heard before. And then nothing really happens. But you'll be back tomorrow because maybe tomorrow is the night it all comes out. Sound familiar? Hughes was careful to say he's not arguing that UFOs don't exist. He's arguing that if your perception of a topic is being managed, then you are, by definition, inside a psychological operation. And the Seoul story maps onto his framework almost perfectly. And he's not the only one asking these questions. George Knapp, who testified before Congress and is arguably the most credible UAP journalist working today, acknowledged it directly when Representative Nancy Mace asked him during that September 2025 hearing if any of this could be a psyop. His answer? Entirely possible. I mean, our government and other governments have admitted that they've tried to use UFOs to cover secret projects. He gave a specific example. The Air Force planting fake UFO photos near Area 51 to create cover stories for classified aircraft testing. That's not conspiracy theory. That's documented history. Then you've got Joe Rogan, who's hosted nearly every major figure in this story at one point or another. And even Rogan, who clearly finds the topic fascinating, has expressed deep skepticism about the information pipeline. He told his audience,
I want to talk to the guy that sees the ship. That's it. Yes. No one else. Yes. And until then, I just feel like I'm being hosed. Yeah. It just seems too laid out on a platter. Yeah.
And then he made an observation that really stuck with me.
UFO disclosure is happening at the time of deepfakes. It's so weird, right?
I think that's all on purpose.
So what are we looking at here? Well, there are essentially 3 camps. Camp 1 says that it's real. An alien craft of enormous size sits hidden under a purpose-built structure near Seoul, South Korea. Multiple independent sources have converged on this claim over a period of years. A sitting congressman is actively pursuing access with White House support. A former intelligence officer whose whistleblower complaint was found credible and urgent is advising him. The pattern of convergent testimony is exactly what you would expect to see if the story were true. Camp 2 says this is a misidentification mixed with wishful thinking. The facility is a Vortex navigation station, fully explained by its aviation function. The stonework is consistent with military construction in a country that's been on a war footing for 70 years. The aviation records prove the facility predated any alleged crash, and nobody, not one person, has produced a single piece of physical evidence. And Camp 3 says this might be something worse than either of those two. That the disclosure narrative itself is a controlled operation designed to manage public perception for purposes we don't fully understand yet. Maybe to justify black budget spending, maybe to distract from something else entirely, maybe to create such a thick fog of claims and counterclaims that if something genuinely extraordinary were ever revealed, the public would be too exhausted to care. The political analysis site Political Saucer made an argument that I think is worth sitting with. Repeated cycles of bombshell claims that never deliver verifiable proof create something called disclosure fatigue. In this view, the PSYOP isn't about making you believe. It's about making you stop believing. It's about inoculating the public against the truth by drowning it in the noise. And here's the thing that really keeps me up at night about this story. All 3 of those explanations can be simultaneously true. It's possible that an extraordinary object exists. It's possible that the specific facility identified is not where it's hidden. And it's absolutely possible that the way this information is being released to the public is being carefully managed, regardless of what the underlying truth actually is. Chase Hughes said something during his interview that I think sums up the whole dilemma perfectly. He said that if someone sits in front of you and says, I can't say this, but I can tell you this one thing, that's not a whistleblower. That's a controlled government release of information. And yet, David Grush filed a formal whistleblower complaint. It was investigated, and the Inspector General found it credible and urgent. That's not nothing. That's the system working exactly the way it's supposed to. So which is it? Is the system working, or is the system the operation? I don't have the answer. And honestly, I'm not sure anyone does right now. What I do know is this. There is a 270-foot stone circle on a mountain south of Seoul that you can look at with your own eyes on a satellite map. There is a 1976 incident in which a government opened fire on unidentified lights over its own capital city and then tried to pretend it didn't happen. There is a congressman with a decorated intelligence officer on his staff, backed by the White House, actively trying to get to a specific site overseas. And there is a behavioral scientist who makes a very compelling case that every single breadcrumb you've been fed is exactly the breadcrumb someone wanted you to find. The story isn't over, not by a long shot. Whether the answer turns out to be extraterrestrial, terrestrial, or something we haven't even considered yet, the fact that we're having this conversation in 2026 with members of Congress and the White House involved tells you something has fundamentally shifted. The question is whether that shift is bringing us closer to the truth or further from it. So what do you think? Are we being visited, manipulated, or both? My money is on option number 3. Don't forget to check out the C7 chair at flexispot.com, link in the description, and use our promo code C750 to get $50 off. Or check out the leaner version C5 or the souped up C7 Morpher. If you want to further explore this crazy universe of ours with another mind-boggling episode, click right here. Be careful out there, and I will see you here again on the In-Between.